That's really weird. I just figured out that this camera hits record when you blink at it. Let me try again, see if it goes off. Just look like I'm having a seizure now. Okay. So yeah, I wanted to continue on from the last video, and someone posted a comment in the last video saying my memory's so rubbish. Something like a concept about non-conceptuality is still a concept, and that's a really good point. And it just illustrates the limitations of the mind and the tendency of the mind to continue on recreating and repeating the same conceptual framework. It illustrates the prison of the mind, how the mind keeps us seemingly trapped in a maze of concepts, how the conceptual frameworks come through the back door and hijack this let's say non-dual teaching, let's say, and how that's what can be used as a practice, let's say, to implode the mind or to dissolve the mind's tendency and power to bounce around inside concepts and try and figure things out. I've mentioned before the paradox. When the mind contradicts itself enough, these contradictory ideas seem to cancel themselves out, and that paradox creates an opening, and in that opening then the true non-conceptual, non-dual reality, let's say, can shine through, can become clear. Anything that's a conclusion or a belief or an idea or a philosophical statement or anything like that, isn't it, of course. And these conclusions of the mind are so uncertain, so inconclusive, compared to that which is not a concept. And yeah, that comment is very good, because it mirrors the tendency, or it highlights a tendency that's very strong in myself to conceptualize, or to the very strong tendency to try and figure things out, to stay in the mind. And that tendency is what led to this opening, I think, in a way, because the suffering that generated, the confusion and the dissatisfaction that generated became so strong. I think in one of my earlier videos I said something like my mind became suicidal in a way, one of my, in fact, I think that was the very first video I posted. They said, I felt like the mind, the ego, became suicidal. It's seeking its own end. It was seeking to torture itself. It was seeking to just go all the way, and that tendency still exists now. The tendency to there's a fascination and a satisfaction now in bending the mind up, pushing it to its limits, seeing how far it can go, and experiencing those limits and that struggle, the stop and start of the mind. I wouldn't say it's like in a masochistic way, but now that there's no longer reality in it, there's no longer certainty and solidity in the illusions of the mind. There's no longer an entity that it's happening to that is accountable for this. With the dark, so-called dark night of the soul stuff, with the huge fear reactions and the terror, the existential terror, there was a point where that seemed so real that it was absolutely terrifying, and it was horrible. But then there's a flip that comes, and then that to which that experience refers or belongs thins out to the extent, and the belief in that disappears to the extent that the capacity to feel these terrors increases to an infinite degree. And then now, because I know the again, limits of language, because there's no belief in the reality of these thoughts, these concepts, and so on, I have no problem with flowing with them, because they don't go anywhere, they don't refer to anything, and there's a lightness to that allows me to flow with it. And that's probably one of the reasons why I talk so much shite on this channel. If there was a strong belief maybe in the reality of that which I'm talking about in concepts, I know I try and highlight that there is no reality in it frequently, that I probably would be more specific with what I'm saying, and there'd be less waffling and less inaccurate statements. But I mean, every statement is inaccurate from a no point of view. From no point of view, nothing is accurate. And from various point of views, everything is either accurate or not accurate. But now it's like ongoing. There is a tendency to enjoy the fascination with any sort of visceral fear reaction that comes up now. Now and again, there will be the echoes of that dark night stuff, but again, I'm making huge inaccurate statements here, but now there is a tendency to go into that as much as possible and try and appreciate it as like a horror movie. Let's say, if you can imagine going to see a horror movie, being feeling the fear, getting involved in the fear, feeling that visceral fear, fright, and disgust, but it not being real, it being completely safe. That's the kind of environment, let's say. And it's the same with the thoughts and the thought streams. There's no reality in it, so there's no issue with flowing with it and having interest and fascination there with it. At a certain point on this journey, let's say relatively, there was a battle with the ego, but it was ego battling with itself, and there was a mental anguish in trying to figure this out, the question. And the question is never figured out, is never answered. The question is just entertainment at the end of the day. So when I talk to people who are going through this journey, that all that's perceived from here, let's say, is awakeness, oneness, talking to itself, seeming to pretend to be an individual, to have a story, to have a journey. That's all I can see. That's all that makes sense. There's not unawake people waking up. It's just awakeness, being awake, pretending to exist as a separate entity with this story. An interesting story. So there is a infinitely heightened sense of emotional resonance and empathy at a certain point. At one point in the journey, the story of that referring to someone here, or some center point here, has some reality. It can be intense. No, it can still be intense, but there's a heightened sense of empathy in the kind of energetic and emotional immediate spectrum. So see, you know how you are in someone's company and you get a vibe off them, that kind of thing, and that increases to an infinite degree. It's almost palpable. You feel everything because you are everything. There's no filter there. If someone has intense emotions, you will feel them too. And it's noticed that you always felt them. It was just, there was something blocking that, there was something separating that, there was something labeling that, yours and mine. And you feel that more, and that becomes more important, infinitely more important in the mental dialogue and stuff like that. So you end up just, life moves through itself, things seem to happen, and these flavors, these energies that are all this, all, let's say, self, ultimate self, to make a concession, but they almost savoured as a flavour, as a flavour of life. And it doesn't matter what the content of that is, or the specifics, or the label. Life moves through and within itself, and these flavours are presented, and they're savoured as in a delicious meal. It gets to that point, and then when that beautiful movement through life manifests, let's say, like that, the stories and stuff are completely peripheral, diminished, superficial, irrelevant. The emotion, the flavour, the experience, the reality of life heightens to such an enormous degree, and that becomes more important than the concepts, the conceptual frameworks, and the story of the mind. So many people, so I have talked to and kind of built some sort of relationship with 15 of the people who are subscribed to this channel. I don't know who the rest are. and most of these are ongoing, but some things I notice, just to bring them up, is talking about beliefs, is that frequently there will be the download into the mind and the assumption of a belief in, let's say, the non-dual teaching. So people will say things like, this is my experience, but I know that all is one, or I know that I'm not here, I'm not a person, or this is my this is how I feel, but I know this. And that's bullshit. I can tell you that. You just let that stuff go, because a belief in it is peripheral to your actual felt lived experience. So holding on to the idea of no self, holding on to that idea of as a belief of non-separation, non-duality, ultimate reality, timelessness, whatever, presence, all of the buzzwords that all are bullshit but point to the one no thing. The non-dual no thing. Those beliefs they're just beliefs. All they are is beliefs, and all they are is thoughts. And if they're believed, then they're thoughts with power, with reality. You're almost better off if you don't listen to what I'm saying. You're better off if you just disregard every single thing I'm saying, and I think that's probably true. Unless you know what I'm talking about, unless you have connected directly with, let's say, what I'm always pointing to, or talking about, or trying to talk about on this channel, unless you know what that is, and you can't know it in the conventional sense because it isn't a thing, it's nothing, you can't know nothing, but unless you know that paradox, that non-dual paradox, you've tasted it, you're almost better off just not listening to non-dual talks, or because the tendency to turn it into a concept is so strong. The tendency to turn it into a belief and handle it in the conventional way the mind usually constructs and manages reality is so strong that it will just be assimilated and reified by the mind instantly. And when it becomes a belief, that can be a hindrance. Because there's nothing I can say true about this. There's no way it is. There's no confirmation. There's no conclusion. No matter how many times I say this on this channel, even this mind, even my mind, myself, thought process will continue to function that way. It never doesn't do that. It never doesn't do that, and it can never get it. That never happens. So I think there was an advantage here at the start, because I consumed a lot of material, as I said before, regarding non-duality and spirituality, enlightenment, Buddhism and stuff like that, but there was a massive gap there where I forgot a lot of it, and then something kind of revived that curiosity, and I didn't what quickly it became much more interesting to me to exist in this immediate sensory reality as presence, to take that up as an enjoyable hobby, not a goal pursuit. Instantly that became much more interesting and intriguing than the mental stuff, and that was, if I had got caught into the trying to figure it out, that would have kind of masked this insight of that intrigue, that natural curiosity, and that natural noticing, natural subtle recognition of this is what I'm talking about. But what I find valuable about these words and the contradictions is that if the mind cancels itself off out enough, if it ties itself up, if it stalls, there's an opening there, there's a gap there, there's a window into the ultimate reality, into infinity, into outside the narrative or the conceptual framework, and I think there's some value to that. I think traditionally they're known as koans in the Zen tradition. It's a question that doesn't have an answer, doesn't have a logical answer, so that trying to figure it out, the mind can't figure it out, so it creates this opening, it creates this window into ultimate reality or truth or presence or consciousness or whatever you want to call it. And I think that's the only value in what this channel is all about, talking nonsense. That's the only value in that, unless there's an interest. Unless there's an interest without any strong belief or strong reality in the content. But there have been some things I've listened to that have just clicked something. I'd listened to various different teachings or talks talking about the same thing, and for some reason one sentence or one explanation just clicked for some reason. I don't know why, but that's what seems to happen a number of times, as I can remember. But a good practice, I think I mentioned this in the comments here, a good practice is, I think someone mentioned that they were I think they said that they were stuck in the conceptual mind reality, or something like that. Again, sorry, my memory's garbage now, but I think they said something like there's a strong tendency to conceptualize and think. And if that's the case, a really good practice is to, rather than focus on the content of the words or the writing or the mind as it tells a story, because if there's a focus on the contents, the story, the narrative, that's when the asleepness comes in, that's when the solidity of that narrative is more pronounced. Focus on, say, thoughts, right? Focus on the substance of the thoughts, what the thoughts are made of, even what that experience is actually like, indirect reality, indirect experience, and immediacy and presence. What is a thought? See if you can, it almost seems like you hear it, but you're not really hearing it, it's not a sound. It almost seems like you're speaking it sometimes, or it almost seems like you can see it, but it's not a sight. It's strange. If you really get interested in that, focus in on the thought material. What is that made of? What is that experience? That almost cancels out the narrative. That diminishes the reality of the narrative and ignites that curiosity into this present reality, this present experience, what thought actually is. Because if we follow the content, there is an assumed reality to it. The same with sounds. So as I'm talking here, rather than listening to the content of the words, which you could probably still listen to and understand the content of the words without thinking about it, what is the sound? What is the sound made of? Where is it? What is that experience? Where is the sound? Can you find the sound? Can you find a shape to it, a size to it, a boundary to it, a direction to it, an immediate experience without an explanation from the mind? What is the sound? Can you locate it? Is it locatable? And find that it's a mystery. It's unknowable, unlocatable. Not talking about the mind here, what the mind says about it. It's unknowable, unlocatable. But there's a certainty to it, a knowingness to it that already knows itself. It's already aware of itself without having to be figured out. That's the non-dual paradox that I talk about. Touch, go right into the touch, the feelings, even with physical pain. What is that? So for example, I grip this steering wheel here and then I let it go. Witness the coming and the going of the sensation. When does it appear in experience? When does it disappear? And where are the boundaries to that seeming one separated sensation, experience? And then with the sights, this is the tricky one. What would the world look like if you didn't know objects? If your memory, your recall memory had been wiped and you didn't know what an object was? You couldn't distinguish objects from the totality of this visual field. What would it look like? Of course it would look the same, wouldn't it? But what wouldn't be there? What is added to the experience that makes it look like these are separate objects in a world of separate things? It makes it look like you're a separate entity over here looking at a world over there. What is the actual experience? Word of caution, that's the one that triggered for me the most visceral and intense fear reaction, is the realizing that there is no separation, that realizing that the space is an illusion, that feeling that it was all closing in on me until it was realized that the me was also an illusion, or this physical body was also an augmentation of the mind. But that's a good practice to do, to get out of the content of contextual or conceptual, relative, objective mind stuff, because it's such a strong mechanism. It's so ingrained, it creates the world in a sense, even though what we call the world is already there. Paradox again, but it's almost augmented on top of reality, the mind's objectification of separated reality. But that's not even a good way to put it, because it's so integrated into it, so tightly integrated into it in the beginning. Anyway, I'm running out of time. That'll do for now, and I'll talk to you next time.